everyone. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Jack Wang. I am CEO of Longhorn Financial. We help families lower the cost of college, pay for it efficiently, and do so in a way that still allows them to retire. But Webinar Wednesday this week, I have my really good friend Elizabeth Boudreau from Layer Realty. I'm really excited that she's here. Each week, if this is your first Webinar Wednesday, just so you know, we do this each week on various financial topics: college, retirement, managing debt, budgeting, cash flow. From time to time, it is just me sharing information. On alternating weeks, I will have a special guest. Webinar Wednesdays run not any longer than 30 minutes. I should be able to say that clearly. So it's just quick hits, quick tips for you to be able to learn some information. There's no sales pitch. It's just sharing information and answering questions. If you miss any of the episodes, you can always go back to my YouTube page, which you'll get an email from me with the link, but you can always go back to my YouTube page and catch the replays on the prior Webinar Wednesday. So without further ado, so let me introduce my good friend Elizabeth. So she's a graduate of UMass Lowell, finance degree, and she actually started her career in banking, much like me, working in the retail side as a branch manager, but she always had a passion for real estate. She actually bought her first property at age 22, something that I know I didn't do, but looking back, I probably should have. And she's carried that passion all the way through to helping others invest in real estate or buy their first homes, what have you. After some time in banking, she actually moved down to Florida for a couple of years and actually spent some time in the commercial real estate world, helping specialize in leasing and sale of office space and such. But after spending a couple of years in Florida, which, it's nice weather, but, her family is back here, so she decided to move back and become a realtor. So she has been representing sellers now for about 5 years. She's licensed in 3 states, and loves it. And so I'm thrilled to have her on to share some real estate tips, in particular about buying multifamily properties. So Elizabeth, I think I caught everything there. So welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on with us.
Thank you for that wonderful intro. That was amazing. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. No, it's a pleasure to have you on. So we talked a little bit about you going from banking into real estate because you always had a passion. But share with the audience a little bit. Let's sort of dig into that a little bit more. Share with the audience a little bit more about the real estate, and because real estate as a term is quite encompassing, right? There's the commercial real estate, which I know you did for a while. There's residential real estate, which I know you do now. Plus, there's even sort of this multifamily, live in one, rent the other one out type of thing that I know we'll talk about later. So talk to us a little bit about sort of the different facets of real estate and sort of what area you like to focus on the most with your buyers and sellers, and just talk a little bit about sort of your passion behind that.
Yeah, so it is very broad. When people mention real estate, you're absolutely correct on that. I've always had, it always boils down to for me, this similar kind of theme as like, I am passionate about helping people invest and set themselves up for the future. So whether that means investing in their first home and building equity so they can eventually get an equity line, they can apply that equity line for college or, anything else that they'd want, or whether that means investment property or like an owner occupied multifamily. It's basically like this underlying theme of I've consistently wanted to help people set themselves up for the future, acquire assets that appreciate, that where eventually you can have your money working for you versus you constantly working for your money.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense because oftentimes, right, people talk about how real estate is the biggest purchase or biggest investment they'll make in their lifetime. Let's talk about current circumstances right now. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Granted, the country is trying to reopen. There's still some restrictions about sort of capacity and where people are able to go. So, but yet I hear these stories that the real estate market is more than alive and kicking, despite the pandemic, despite the shutdown. So share with us a little bit about sort of your perceptions about sort of how the real estate market is going right now for both buyers, right, and then sort of separately for sellers, right? Because I would imagine it's got to be a little bit different. The perspective, boy, I really can't speak tonight, but the perspective got to be different for both.
Yeah, it's definitely, been having this conversation a lot, and it's very much a strong seller's market. So what that means for buyers is it's very competitive. Um, so basically, as a buyer, you have to be prepared to come in. You have to be prepared, there may be multiple offers on the property, and you have to be prepared to kind of tweak the contingencies on the offer to make yourself as competitive as possible. You have to actually get in the psychology of the seller as a buyer and think about what would be the most appealing type of offer with the contingencies. So that's kind of how I coach my buyers on the buying and offer strategy. But yeah, right now it's very much a great seller's market, competitive for buyers. So you have to expect multiple offers on any property that a buyer would be interested in.
And that is just so interesting because you think about how real estate agents and how the typical residential real estate market goes. You see the signs on the weekends, right? Open house here, open house there. You get a bunch of people. And I'm starting to see a little bit of that come back. But yet during the pandemic, right? I mean, where, many people were afraid to even go to the store, never mind to somebody else's house, right? But yet it didn't, it still happened, right? Real estate still got sold. So it's just incredible. I would imagine, so with on the seller side, I mean, are sellers still seeing bidding wars and sort of offers come in quickly, right? Sort of like it was pre-pandemic.
So there's always a demand. You have to think about there's always buyers that have a need, that need to move for whatever circumstances going on in their life. I mean, I could, go through all that. There's, divorces and children and all kinds of things. So will always be a demand. And right now there's just not a lot of inventory for people to pick from. So there is a high sense of urgency. This is the conversation that I'm kind of going through and like coaching my buyers right now. But there is a strategy. There are strategies that I can go through. I don't know if you want me to touch on that now or not for buyers.
Well, we can come back to. There's a question that I do want to touch upon that's related to this. So, oftentimes, for a family, let's say they're trying to get a bigger house because their family size is growing or what have you, they're in a position where they have to sell their house, but yet buy another house, right? For this to work, right? For the numbers to work and everything else. Strong market for sellers, like you said, offers are coming in. So on the selling side, that I would imagine that can happen relatively quickly. Much more competitive on the buying side because their offer might not get picked, right? Is sort of the bottom line. How do you counsel clients who are in that situation? Like they need to sell, but they need to buy.
Yeah.
You can't live in the van, right, with your young kids for while these things are waiting to happen, right? You got to make this happen all at once.
Yeah. So I'm seeing this a lot. So what we do in this scenario where you have to, in order to buy, you have to sell, which it's right now, it's a great seller's market. You should not, there's no worry on that side. But so what you do is we have a suitable housing clause. So you have this clause is written into when you list your house. So you list your house and you put a suitable housing clause there in order to tell people that yes, your home is for sale, and yes, it can go under contract. We'll accept offers, but it will not close until the suitable housing clause says that until they have found another property that suits their needs, that this house cannot close. sometimes there's a time frame for this, but the buyers of their house know this going in, that they are under contract, but the sellers of the house need to find another property. So the sellers of this house, they need to find another property. If they're buying, they can also, it's totally up to them, but they can also put a home sale contingency. If they have, this market may or may not call for it, but if they have any worry about their house not selling for some reason, and they go and put their purchase under contract, what they would do is put a home sale contingency. So if their house for some reason fell out of contract, they're not on the hook to buy that house without the funds from their sale, if that makes sense. So we have those two clauses,
Yep.
home sale contingency and suitable housing, and we can play with those to make it work for whatever market we're in.
Right. Well, absolutely. I mean, if you need the numbers to work from the sale of one house in order to buy another, the last thing you want is to end up owning two houses, right? Or being under sort of contract. Like you own yours and you're obligated to buy the other. That wouldn't be so much fun. So you did just touch upon this briefly. So I do want to get back to it now. So it's a seller's market, a lot of competing bids. And I know you mentioned, I love this, which is sort of having the buyer sort of get into the mind of the seller, understand the psychology, understand sort of what the seller's really going for. But you mentioned that sort of helping buyers with a strategy, right? So talk a little bit more about that. Perhaps, what are some tips or some of the strategies that you share with your clients so that their chances of having their offer accepted increase?
Definitely. Yeah. So I tend to be very aggressive. Um, so so there's two different strategies. If you're the only offer, you have a lot of negotiating power and you can kind of, work those negotiations if you're the only offer. Right now in this market, what we're seeing is competing offers. So multiple offers on every property. So if you need to move and you're in a market with competing multiple offer situation, there are three major things that I always bring up in this conversation to compete against other offers. So number one would be to humanize your offer. So if you think about it, like these sellers, they're selling their home. They may have lived there for 40, 50 years. There's an emotional connection there. So if you can humanize your offer to stand out from the rest of the offers, and you can write a letter, you can include a picture, I always write email on behalf of my clients as well to just emphasize how much they are really interested in this property. It really puts the seller, it gives them a peace of mind that these buyers are committed, they're vested, they really want to go through the property. They're not going to, because in the seller's mind, worst case scenario is you have buyers that waver and then down the line they may step out of the transaction and you're stuck putting the property back on the market. So sellers do not want to do that. So if you can upfront show how committed you are, by humanizing and showing a picture of your family and already, we've picked out our bedrooms already, kind of thing. So I like to do that. So the second thing that we can use in a competing bidding atmosphere is escalation clause. So an escalation clause is basically says that whatever offer comes in, you'll offer a certain amount higher than that offer. So we need to see proof of the offer. But so say a house is for sale for $550,000. We'll offer $550,000 with an escalation clause, and we'll offer $5,000 over any bona fide competing offer. So it means that someone can't come in with $555 and really, if they're price sensitive, beat your offer out. You have an opportunity to come back. And for a buyer, for over 30 years, it's minimal. If you really want the house, if you really have an urgency to move, then it's very minimal, $5,000 over the course of 30 years. It's dollars.
Right.
Yep. And the other thing with the escalation clause is you can go up to a certain amount, which if you have financing for the house, like there's cash buyers and there are finance buyers, if you are getting financing, the house still has to appraise in order for your financing to go through. So
Right.
some people might be like, oh my gosh, I'm overpaying. But actually, once you get the appraisal, if the appraisal comes through, your financing will be okay. If it does not appraise at that point, you have another opportunity to negotiate the appraisal price. So you're
Right.
not necessarily overpaying for the property. So that's
Right.
yeah.
Right. That makes sense because with that kind of clause, I suppose sometimes the fear is, hey, I'm buying a $200,000 house, but some crazy bidder came in and bid, 5 million. Now I'm going to go to 5 million and 5,000, but it still has to appraise out, right? So $200,000 house is not going to appraise out for 5 million, no matter what happens.
Yeah. So
So you have some protection.
yeah, so you may win the bid, but if it doesn't appraise, then potentially the seller has the option of going down to the appraisal price, or your buyer walking, because no one's going to pay over the appraisal price. Like bringing you to basically, the bank's only going to finance you so far. You'd have to bring cash, and then it's just not likely to happen like that.
Right.
So,
So
and
let's.
oh,
Oh,
I was
sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
one last thing, one tip and kind of strategy that I use is playing with the home inspection. So typically a home inspection is ordered with the, as far as the contingencies, that's one of the contingencies, the home inspection. So if a buyer is very confident in the property, maybe if they are well versed and maybe their trade is construction. Some of my buyers waive home inspection. If they don't feel comfortable waiving home inspection, you can actually add the verbiage inspection for informational purposes only, which you still get the home inspection, you still get the information, but it tells the seller that you're not going to ask for like repairs and little tiny things. You're basically saying that, yes, we want the home inspection, we'd like to know what's going on with the house, but we're not going to come back with a laundry list of requests. And at the same time, the buyer has the protection and still is able to walk away if there's something, very, big that they don't want to take on.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. That's a great point. Yeah, because I know that sometimes would be the fear. Um, so to a certain extent, along the same lines, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about multifamilies, sort of buying a two-family, which I know that off camera, you and I have talked about how you have some properties on your own. And so, it kind of relates back to the home inspection, because I know for me personally, I don't even like fixing my own stuff. I certainly don't want to get the call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, by the way, the plumbing's bad. Okay. Right. So that's where I would always want the home inspection, but that's me. But talk a little bit about buying a multifamily. So if someone was thinking about buying two family where they'll live in one side or one unit, rent out the other. Yes, it's still real estate, but the game changes a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about sort of the dynamic of sort of buying those types of properties if you have someone interested.
Definitely. Yeah. So there are, I was thinking of three major things. So you can get very detailed. There's landlord courses, which I recommend for anyone thinking about like first time being a, investor, landlord. But the three major things that I would say is to consider, one, whether you're going to live in the property or not. So if you're going to live in the property, you can put a lot less down, as low as like 3% down. If you're not going to live in the property, it's about 25% down for a investment property. So that's owner occupied versus not. So that's the first thing is you can put a lot less down for owner occupied. You can also, if you're a first time home buyer and you're thinking about owner occupied multifamily, you can still qualify for a lot of the first time home buyer, like lower rates. I've had some of my first time home buyer multifamily buyers, they get grants or even down payment assistance from some of these programs. So it's pretty good for first time home buyers. The other thing is like valuing the property. So Whenever I'm looking at a multifamily with a client, I go through, you have to look at the expenses, and we have to look at average. So sometimes they have tenants, sometimes they don't have tenants. We look at what the tenants are currently paying, but that's not always accurate. You can't go by what the tenants are currently paying because that might not be fair market rent right now. So I basically go through a detailed conversation with my clients, or whether, okay, are we inheriting these tenants? What are the lease terms? Are we, are they going to stay or go? Those kind of things. So the valuing of the property and factoring in all the expenses versus the rental income. And the current rental income could be different from future income, which depends on the lease terms. So you want to look at the lease terms as well. The last tip I have for multifamilies, they can get very detailed, but I go through all these things. The last tip for when you get a multifamily is consider keeping 5% of the rental income in reserves. So every month you get rental income. Say it's, depending if it's a two family, maybe it's like 3,000 or 4,500, depending on the area, just ballpark numbers. But take 5% of that monthly rental income and just put it away, and just keep putting away every month 5% of the rental income to cover all the different, expenses. Typically, you'd have the utilities covered by the tenants, but in Massachusetts, usually you're covering the water and any kind of repairs, that may come up. So I think that's a safe number, 5% of the monthly rental income.
So need a new roof, need to paint the outside or put siding on, all that kind of stuff, right? That would come out of that 5% number. So, so I know people who do a lot with real estate, and yourself included. I think the big wild card for some people is the tenant, right? Especially in a two family, because it's, whether you live there or not, it's not like you have a 50-unit apartment complex where if you have one bad tenant, you might have 49 other good ones. So it kind of balances out. But if you're, living on one side and your tenant is, you don't get along with them or whatever, that can be a nightmare. So I've heard stories like, if, when things go well, they're great. When things don't go well, not so much, right? So what's a tip on sort of screening tenants, right? If someone were to get into this as a first time, how do they find that good tenant so that things go great?
Yeah. So you have two options as a landlord. You can hire a realtor to screen your tenants, or you can, do it yourself. And whether you hire a realtor or whether you do it yourself, I would always recommend, what I do when a client hires me to rent out their units. There's an application, there's a credit check, and there's a background check. And basically, when you want to market, you want to get it out to as many people as possible, so you get as many applications back as possible, so you can pick from the very best of the best. And so that includes, listing it on the MLS, which MLS feeds to Zillow, Trulia, all these other third-party sites. Networking with other professionals, like sending it out to, there's a reverse email section on the MLS where if anyone was searching for a criteria, you can kind of send an email to ping them again. So marketing is important in the beginning to get as many eyeballs as possible on the property. Pictures because a lot of people are identifying online whether they want a property, right? So if you have bad pictures, you might be cutting a lot of people out right away unintentionally. And then once you get the applications in, those three pieces: application, the credit check, and the background check. And then when you're reviewing all the so you want to get as many in as possible, so you have as many to pick from. When you're reviewing, you just take into all those pieces into consideration. So when I heard nightmare stories in the past, I think that they were not doing one of those pieces. They weren't doing a credit check, or they weren't doing a background check. There was a missing piece, and they've had good intentions, but it if you do a deal on a handshake, it's only as good as that. So
right.
Yeah, and then the lease and getting on the same terms. Writing out the lease and making sure that you're on the same terms as far as that. So
Right, right, absolutely. All right, very quickly, because we're just about out of time here. Uh, if someone is looking to buy or sell, right, obviously when they're ready to do it, they should contact somebody like you. But when should, even if they're in the thinking about it stage, when should they contact a realtor? Like how far in advance to
yeah,
start getting some expert guidance?
yeah, I think the realtor should be the first point of contact. A lot of some people will contact their lender or their bank, which I think is great because they're like that proactive, where they're just like, all right, like I want to get. They have that mindset. They're like, I'm gonna get pre-approved because they know that's the first step, which is great. But the realtor can really be the liaison, and they can, because there are many options. There's many options for lenders. There are different programs, grants, first-time homebuyer programs. So I feel like when you identify a realtor you want to work with, they have the connections for the lenders, they have the connections for the attorneys, and they won't like, if they're if they're good, they won't like pigeonhole, or they won't guide you to use just one person. They should give you options and like pros and cons. There are pros and cons to using a bank for a lender, and there are pros and cons for using a mortgage company. And they should go over all your options and kind of lay everything out so you can choose what the best option for you is. And that's like a good realtor will give you all your options with no pressure to go with one person or the other, and say, hey, you can go with the title company or an attorney. It's your choice. Here are the pros and cons of each. And they should kind of go over all of those with. So I believe that the realtor should kind of be the first point of contact, because they kind of have all those connections and can lay out all your options without you being committed to one person.
Okay, great tip. Very briefly, how can people get in touch with you?
Yep. So my website is homesweethomene.com, as in Home Sweet Home New England. They can also email me at eboudreau, which is my last name, at lairrealty.com. Or my phone, like you may know, all realtors are glued to their phone, is 978-855-2620.
Awesome, awesome. Elizabeth Boudreau, boy, can't speak. Elizabeth Boudreau of Layer Realty, thank you so much for being on Webinar Wednesday. I want to thank everyone who tuned in for this particular episode. Again, you'll get an email with Elizabeth's contact information on there, as well as the link to my YouTube channel so that you can watch any past episodes that you may have missed. Thanks again to Elizabeth for being on, and everybody stay safe and have a great night.
Thank you so much.